from the heart of Dubai, where tomorrow is being built today, to the world. Welcome to the CTO Show with Mehmet. Here, we redefine technology and reimagine possibilities. With Mehmet, delve into the riveting realms of AI, cybersecurity, and digital technology. Experience the thrilling highs and lows of startups. Immerse yourself in the spirit of entrepreneurship and witness the future of business innovation being written in real time. Now, without further ado, let's tune in and explore the future.
Hello and welcome back to an episode of the CTO Show with Mehmet. Today, I'm very pleased joining me, Eric Müller. Eric is Product Engineering Associate Director at Work & Co. Eric, thank you very much for making it here today. It's an honor to have you as a guest on the show. The way I love to do it is I keep it to my guests to give us a little bit more about their journey, their background, and what they're currently up to. So the floor is yours, Eric.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you for having me. Gosh, I don't often think about my journey. So basically how I got here, I was definitely very much into computers as a kid, Gen X. So kind of when I was a kid, it definitely wasn't a thing that was kind of cool. Most people didn't play around with computers. So started playing around with them when my father brought home a PC. He kind of built it himself for my mom's schoolwork. So started playing around with that. Kind of floated around a little bit in college, wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. So I was kind of jumping between architecture, photography, and computer science. And I kind of feel like all three of those really kind of played into my career. Started doing technology work at Wells Fargo Bank, working on some kind of proprietary systems. Company at the time called Culver was making some software that was basically only used by two banks. Wells Fargo and Bank of America. They were the biggest users of that software. And so I was working on some of the teller systems for Wells Fargo Bank, ended up getting into the web right around that time. So this was in the early 90s. Started floating around, did some contract work, ended up with Charles Schwab, then got into the agency world, worked at Razorfish for a while. Was doing architecture at that point. The creativity, from my photography studies really helped as well, working for that kind of front-end focused company. Ended up at Edelman for a little bit, started getting deeper and deeper into computer security at that point. Then went to a company called Presence. I was there for about a decade, was the CISO there, pushed our SOC 2 initiatives, started working on security for our clients. And then we were acquired by Work & Co about 3 years ago. And I continued doing the same thing, helping push forward some of our security initiatives here and consulting for some of our clients, making sure that they're in a really good shape security-wise.
Great. What an awesome journey, I would call it, Eric, across, multiple companies and great of exposure for different technologies also as well. So if I want to ask a little bit more about product engineering, right? So today also I'm seeing a lot of shift, right? So AI is everywhere, and whether you are an big organization, maybe especially agency. So there is a lot of, I would say, reliance now on AI. So how are you seeing this AI adoption with the current generative AI wave?
That's complex. And I always have a different approach. So I kind of feel the problem I'm having with the AI space right now is there's really kind of two main camps. So there's kind of the AI hype train, which is, AI can do everything. Like, let's vibe code, let's, give everything to the AI system and cross our fingers, hope for the best, and it will just be wonderful, and we'll build our next unicorn with that. And then I kind of feel like there's a group that's obviously the AI doomers, where And not in when I say AI doomer, it's not in the sense of, AI will become sentient and kill us all, but more in the sense of like AI has no value in this field. What we do, we don't need it. I kind of feel like there's a middle ground, kind of some nuance. So I think AI tools, particularly generative AI for developers, can be a very valuable and powerful tool to support a development team. I think it is not a replacement for developers. I think going down that path introduces some significant problems for the future for any product. At the same time, I think ignoring that, the AI tools, is kind of problematic. I think they are very powerful in helping with some QA. I think they're great with writing boilerplate. I think they can be very useful in very simple, coding situations so that they become an accelerator for a development team as opposed to a replacement of a development team.
So Eric, where do you see then because you mentioned about, I like the bold way you put this out, but where do you see the sweet spot? So where is AI is too much of AI, and where is like keep doing the things the way we used to do is staying behind? How do you find the sweet spot?
So I was listening to another podcast and someone put this really well, and I've always kind of maintained this even before AI. I think that you have to have your development team own the special sauce of your company. So I think that think of like before we had AI tools, we would outsource some of our work to third-party vendors, or we might take some of our core functionality and outsource it to a platform, right? So maybe think of AI tools in the same way. Are you building some baseline marketing website, to support your overall business? You could probably lean heavily into AI for that. But if there is something about your business that's core to your business, that's unique to your business, you need to have human eyes on that. Even in that case, you can have the AI support you, right? There's going to be a lot of boilerplate code at that point. So go ahead and leverage that. But the actual stuff that makes your business unique, that's core to your business, you want to make sure that stuff is solid, that you're putting your business behind that you're not going to be worried about security risks, that you're not using code that's kind of throwaway. That's the stuff that you don't want AI doing. That's the stuff you want human beings doing.
You mentioned security, Eric, and this is actually the one of the topics that wanted to discuss with you today.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you've done it, you helped teams, get their digital security in a, good shape, I would say. Now, coming also from similar background myself, and this is, I think, the first thing they teach us, when we start to learn about cybersecurity is, so the more the security is tight, the more, things might look inconvenience. Now, with this advancement, whether in AI or in the digital space in general, how are you finding, this balance between keeping innovations, keeping, the people want to right, like let's say, solve real problems fast, but at the same time, we know like doing things fast sometimes can break things, but we don't want to break the security aspect of it. So, what kind of balance have you seen working in that space?
In general, or with AI, or both? Like
Both, both.
Uh, AI is harder. I mean, to be honest, right? I think though we still have the same general principles, right? So, I think you're kind of touching on something important, which is there's always this tension between perfect security and something that's usable for end users, right? And every time you introduce some security into your process, either for the front end where the users are interacting with it, or all the way back where the developers are actually writing the code, you're introducing friction. And that's you introduce enough friction into that process or into the application, you're going to start to make it harder for your users to interact with your system. You're going to make it harder for your developers to move forward. So I think there are some kind of core principles that you want to stick to. You want to be very careful about, sharing secrets, putting stuff, baking stuff into your systems that are, like, I don't know, like the classic is like SQL injection vulnerabilities, right? You want to make sure that you're not doing things like that, those baseline things. And you want to be thinking about security from the beginning. You can't go into an application, build it out. You're 3 weeks from launch and you're finally doing your first security review. You're not going to be able to launch, right? Because you're going to find all sorts of security vulnerabilities and you're going to have to go back. It's going to cost you a lot more money to fix those items then, as opposed to when you started from the beginning thinking about security. I think security for AI is a little bit more challenging, right? So if we think of everyone right now, when they think of AI, they're thinking of LLMs and generative solutions, right? And so you have to start thinking from the beginning, what are the things that we're putting into our LLM? What are we training it on? Is this data that we think is valid and recent? Does it make sense for you to train your LLM on data for your company that the data is 10 years old, 15 years old, 20 years old? How relevant is it? When your system generates something, a response to a user, is the response going to be relevant because the training data is valid or invalid? Are we being thoughtful about the kind of information that we're dumping into that LLM? Is it in potentially proprietary, or could it potentially reveal personal information or other secrets that we don't want in that generative space? So we got to be careful about that. Are we looking at the results properly from an LLM? And this is particularly important with developers, right? Is that code that's being generated, is it secure? A big thing that people are talking about right now is, I love the term slopjacking. So, where your LLM decides that it's going to generate a package, links to a package or include a package that does not exist, right? So if someone knows that, there's been some studies that show that, the LLM will generate an invalid package. Someone goes ahead, goes out to NPM, creates that package, so that next time the LLM calls for it, the package exists, it pulls down the code, and now you have a vulnerability, in your environment. So, looking for things like that's really important. And I think that people trust LLMs too much because of that. What is generated, they trust too much. And we need to, have humans look at that stuff. We need to validate the work. We need to do some static analysis, dynamic analysis, making sure the code is good, and then kind of going to production from there.
Right. So about trusting LLMs, I think we've been trusting also search engine results for years. So I think, it's my humble opinion, like we like to kind of take shortcuts sometimes, and myself included, I did this mistake at the beginning, and everything like ChatGPT was throwing at me, I was like taking it, and then I start to figure out, no, hold on 1 second, like there's some stuff which is not right here, and and we start to see there's the retrieval augmented, the RAG, for generative AI and all this. So this is a very valid point. But from business perspective, Eric, and you've been also a CISO yourself. Now, from non-technical leadership perspective, how are you seeing the board are able to grasp all this together, between the push for innovation and keeping, of course, data privacy, data security, data availability, which is like the main course of safeguarding any organization. So, and the reason I'm asking you this, because when I interviewed a lot of CISOs like years ago, and still I talk to some of them, so the challenge was there explaining to business, but what I'm hearing now is that there's like double I would say challenge, because from one point they need also to make the awareness about what you just mentioned. So, in a nutshell, what I want to hear from you is, and maybe this is advice for fellow people also as well who are in the same position. What have you seen working talking to non-technical folks about, the digital security, especially with, the rise of LLMs and Gen AI?
Oh, I'm very unique in that when I talk to people, they're already very interested, and so it's an easier sell, right? Um, you know, I think I guess the advice I would give to other folks, and what I've seen kind of work for me, even in the times where people obviously they're approaching me, I'm a consultant, they want to hear from me, so that's a great starting point, right? And then I'm very thoughtful about the things that I talk about. You have to kind of start with the assumption that your client is interested in the security. And so approaching them and trying to avoid getting heavily into technical language, right? So if you make the conversation too technical, eyes glaze over and you lose them. And so I start thinking about how can we make this real, right? And so one of the things I used to do when I was working with smaller clients, and they would ask me, hey, we want to, we're looking at a security initiative or we're trying to build something out. And I might see a problem that I want to kind of, help them through. And they would sort of start to push back, hey, maybe we don't have the time for this. We don't have the money for this. I would start to look at the scenario, kind of some, a little threat model, if you will, and think about if this scenario came to fruition, how would it impact their business? Right. I would try to make it real. And I would try to look at, a realistic scenario. I wouldn't, worry about, trying to come up with some pie in the sky thing that they would kind of roll their eyes at. I would try to think about, hey, um, if people hijack, I don't know, here's a really bad example, but very simple. Hey, I know it's easier for you to keep that secret, your AWS key inside of GitHub,
Right.
or you think your GitHub account is all nice and private. But if for whatever reason that gets out into the public, your AWS account is going to be compromised. They'll be able to get at your databases. All of that information in there is going to be public and your business is gone. Right. That's not a hard scenario to think through. Right. And so I think being able to provide a realistic scenario, a cost that they can understand, and then finally give them a solution. Hey, keep pulling that secret out of GitHub and putting it into Secrets Manager in AWS. Sure, that might add, an extra 15 minutes, just to, I know that this is an extreme example, but might add an extra 15 minutes, but that 15 minutes of time and the additional work that you might have to do every time you rotate that secret is going to save you potentially millions of dollars, potentially save your business. That's the trade-off. Give them the trade-off, help them understand the downside, help them understand the positive, help them understand what the effort looks like, and it's easier to get them on board with it.
Makes completely sense. This is great, great, great advice, I would say, Eric. Now, just I want to shift a little bit gears and talk about collaboration a little bit. And
Mhm.
like you've worked on both sides, like inside agencies and with global brands. Um, what do you think is something truly proactive for a client engineering collaboration?
I have I have two kind of cliches that I always have. So one of them is we really need to understand their business, and that's kind of straightforward. And I think that's important because um, I've had engineering teams where folks feel like we have to get the engineering absolutely perfect. And I say to my team, you need to understand that, like, sure, we want in the abstract, it would be great if, everything was, abstracted out and we had all this great code and it went through all these reviews and it's just absolutely perfect. But the client is trying to deliver something. They're trying to get something out the door to make money. Um, and so we may have to take on some technical debt. And one time, a long time ago, someone said to me, technical debt is no different than any other business debt. You take on debt wisely to move the business forward, right? And so we may have to make some trade-offs in the work that we're doing to keep moving the business forward. And that's really important to do, because then the client feels like they're being heard. And this is not just, me coming at it as an agency person, but when I was working inside of companies, that was important, because you want your business partner to understand that you know their business, that you hear them, that you know that it is important to get this stuff out the door, to keep the board happy, to keep generating revenue so that everyone keeps getting paid. So when you do that kind of a thing, it makes compromise in the future easier. You do a little bit of trade-off at this moment, and later on, when you kind of come back to them and say, we need to make a hard call for security reasons or other technology reasons, it's easier to have the conversation with the client. The other thing, and I think this is really, really important for people to remember, is the client is right, and we are here to make them righter. Okay. And what I mean by that is a quick anecdote. When I first started being a consultant, I remember I went into a meeting with my client, and the guy was a jerk. Like, there's no other way to describe it. He's his head of engineering, not the head of engineering, but he was leading engineering on the team that I was interfacing with. And the business partner was there. And the guy just immediately jumped down my throat. And I have no idea to this day why. And I immediately went on the attack back, right? I felt attacked, so I went ahead and attacked. And the whole thing ended badly. His manager called my manager, and I had a long conversation with my manager, and I had to go back to the client side, and we apologized to each other. And we were able to move forward, but that tension existed for the rest of the engagement. And what I learned at that point was, one, he had his reasons. Whether or not I thought they were right didn't matter. He had his reasons for the position he was taking. And I needed to acknowledge that. And the next time something like that came up, I absolutely did that. It was with a different client, but I absolutely said, oh, I totally hear you. That totally makes sense. And it totally took away that anger. I was no longer this adversary. I was a partner by doing that. And then we could have a conversation. And I would acknowledge what he was talking about, and then I would help him see a different approach. Right. I helped that second client see the different approach. And so it was, in many ways, it became his idea. Right. And my ego didn't matter at that point. I didn't care if he took, if it was his idea. I wanted him to be successful. And that was the most important thing to me. And I've had that same attitude with all of my clients. Listen to what they're saying. They are right in their mind. And that's really, really important. You have to absolutely acknowledge that. And then work with them at that point and have it be collaborative, have that back and forth, have a friendly conversation, make the idea that you have in your head their idea so that they embrace it, they own it, and they can champion it, going forward.
This made a lot of sense because, not only from a consultant point of view, I mean, in my opinion, when you try to position anything in front of clients, you're a consultant. Sometimes people, they like to use the cliche trusted advisor, right? So I did like sales roles also as well. And one thing which I learned the hard way, similar to you also, Eric, is, like, especially for you, it's different because you're designing something for them or helping them to achieve something. So for me, I'm going to convince them to choose something other than what they have chosen years ago. And what I figured out, like, if you go and you start to hit on what they have currently, so the people like to do the status quo versus like the future state. And what I learned, like, if you start by attacking what they have today, they will be defensive. And I think this is a human nature. And taking this empathic approach that you just described, Eric, I think it works, across, whether you are a consultant, you're in sales for a tech company, or like just an advisor. It works pretty well. and good to see it from you also, or hear it from you as well. Now, one thing just during this, because you mentioned about the debt that happens, and the challenges. So of course this is additional time, of course, because you're gonna try to take it from them, show them no, this is not the way it's gonna work. This is the way in between, right? So how much that takes energy and effort from you internally with your team first, and then how do you communicate this? I mean, like, because I'm sure like there will be some engineers that report to you and they say, "Hey, Eric, like we know it will not work." So how you will manage this kind of, okay, guys, right? Like we're gonna do it. So how you take this and spread it within the team also as well. So to make the team also think the same way as you do.
Well, I think it starts from the beginning of any engagement, any projects that you're doing. And I've been very lucky to be both on the client side and on the consulting side of my career. Um, and so I think this plays in both places, right? Um, so you have to trust your development team. It starts there. If you don't trust your development team, you got to look back and figure out why. And I feel like generally, if there's an issue with trust within your development team, you should probably go look in a mirror. Okay, start there. There, you as the engineering manager, you probably did something, and not necessarily maliciously, but you probably did something that kind of eroded that trust. So figure out how to repair that trust. Um, and the best way to maintain your trust after you started with it is to always keep your team engaged, always keep them in the loop. So I don't go to clients and have conversations with them and then show up an hour later in front of the engineering team and say, surprise. I generally have a conversation with the engineering team from the beginning saying, these are the ground rules. We're here to deliver something for the client. We're going to do our best to deliver the best product possible for the client, whether that, if you're in a company and the client is an internal client, or if you're from outside of the company and you are a consultant, we make it very clear we're going to deliver the best possible product. And then I say to the team, that means sometimes because the client has a need to get out the door, they have a timeline, they have a budget, they have key requirements that have to be met. We may have to make those compromises. And I'm looking at you all to help me figure out what is the right solution for the client, right? Notice it's not me saying, look, this is what we're doing. It's me, hey, team, let's talk together, figure out how to solve this problem for the client, and then let's move forward. If you have the team engaged, they've bought in on it, and it's much easier to move forward because they own it as well. That's the key.
Right. Eric, this is like what and I know like you're a big advocate of, this empathic leadership, right? So I believe like one part also that you have to do sometime is to, like, of course, the trust that you just mentioned, and also psychologically also giving the safety for the team. So uh, let me ask you, what can go wrong? Like where do you see mistakes happens, when it comes to having this psychological safety?
I learned this is really, really important. Probably the most important thing is listening. Again, someone, different mentor, but someone I really respected said, he has one mouth and two ears, and he uses, those in that same proportion, right? And two kind of examples of this. One is, I don't really code anymore. I'll do a little bit of DevOps stuff, obviously, but I really don't code. But I used to. I understand these, at a high level. I understand engineering problems, and so I've had plenty of developers walk up to me and they say they've had a problem. They start talking about the problem, and I just sort of sit there and listen, and then they get to the solution on their own. I may ask a few questions. Hey, have you thought about doing this? Have you thought about doing that? But what I discovered is that by just sitting there and listening, the developer is able to work through the problem on their own. And, I may pull in another person, I may not, but the key there is listening, right? Let them talk through the problem. Don't try to figure out the problem for them. Let them talk through it. If they want some help, they'll ask you explicitly. So that's the first thing. The second thing I learned is, let's ignoring an engineering problem, let's talk about people problem.
Right.
Obviously, there may be challenges. Two members of your team may not be getting along together. There may be an issue with a client. Maybe there's something going on in your engineer's personal life, or they're feeling challenged within the job. I learned that oftentimes the best thing you can do when a developer or a QA person, a product person, anyone on your team approaches you, is to do nothing, right? I think early on in my career, and I think a lot of managers will do this, they have someone approach them and they talk about an issue that they're having, and the manager's immediate response, and I've done this myself early on, your immediate response is, I got to go do something now. I have to take an action. And that's oftentimes the worst thing you can do. The person's not coming to you because they want you to take an action. They're coming to you because they trust you, and they want to, share their feelings, their frustration. They just want to get it out. And once they get it out, they're fine, right? It's like, I can't understand why this person keeps rejecting my PR. It makes no sense. It's really making me angry. And they rant, and then they get it off their chest, and they take a deep breath and go, okay, yeah, maybe I can see the problem. And then they move on. If you take an action there, you've polluted that relationship, right? You've made things difficult. But the fact that you just listen and let the person rant, that's probably the best thing you can do 99% of the time.
Right. Let me ask you, Eric, as I follow up on this, how hard to do this in a hybrid work model world, especially after COVID? Like, maybe 10 years ago or before COVID, let's say, people were in the office, so they can simply knock on your door, just get it out to you and then go. In an online format, whether it's on a Teams, Slack, Zoom, whatever, can it be done the same way, in your opinion?
No, obviously it can't, right? Because, when we were all in the office together, a person would just be walking past you, and suddenly that would be enough to trigger, they want to talk to you. Obviously it's a different situation in the online world. I think the online world puts more pressure on the leader. So one, you as a leader have to have time with your team on a regular basis in a one-on-one situation. Now, some folks will say it should be weekly, it should be monthly, bi-weekly, whatever. I don't think there's a hard and fast rule there. Some folks, if you want to meet with them on a weekly basis, they're going to hate that. They're absolutely going to be annoyed that you want to take a half an hour out of their week and chit chat. So you as a leader need to figure out what is the right rhythm for every person on your team. For some folks, it might be weekly. Some folks, it might be monthly. I think monthly is probably too long, but if you have a high performer and they're doing well and you feel connected with them once a month, great. So establish that rhythm with your team and make sure it's consistent, that you hold on to that time and you keep doing that. And then pay attention to your team if they still want to keep doing that. The next thing is you need to attend your daily stand-ups with your whole team. You need to listen to that. The one thing I don't believe in is a virtual stand-up. And by that, I mean, like, everyone types in Slack what they're doing and then they kind of move on. You need the call. You don't need the faces, right? Turn off the camera. I hate, when managers insist the cameras be on. Don't do that. If someone wants the camera off, let the camera be off. But you want to hear their voice. You want to pay attention to the stand-up. And as the engineering leader, you should be really listening. Don't just, kind of stare off into the distance. Actually listen. Hey, what did they work on yesterday? What are the problems they have today? And keep track of that. And if they keep having the same problem a couple of days in a row, that might be a moment for you to say, hey, let's check in together after the call. I would just want to have a few questions for you to see how you're doing, right? Have that conversation. The other thing you can do is, if you have a team that's highly engaged and working, they're going to be in Slack communicating with each other. make sure you're in those Slack channels. And discourage people from having conversations about the project in one-on-one kind of conversations in DMs. Make those conversations happen inside of Slack in a shared space where everyone can see it. One, it discourages, people from kind of complaining about each other, right? You want to kind of avoid that kind of backbiting that can happen, particularly when you're working with a client. But more importantly, you make it easier for people to overhear, if you will, that two team members are having a problem and they can jump in and contribute. So you're encouraging everyone to see what's kind of going on, and to contribute when appropriate. Um, and the final thing around that is if you're going to encourage people to be in Slack, then you need to encourage people to control Slack. So I turn off that stupid knock knock. I turn off alerts unless a message goes to me either as a DM or an at channel, right? And I encourage people to do the same thing. Slack is, the company wants you to engage with their product all day long. And so they make it as annoying as possible, right? And so you as a manager need to go to your team and help them configure Slack so that it is a tool and not a distraction.
Right. Yeah. I think it's not only engineering teams. I think everyone complains sometime about Slack, like whether in sales organizations or like product teams, engineering teams. Yeah, it's a form of distraction. And the thing is, I used to do this mistake myself. So if you give a favor once on Slack, you're gonna do it all the time. So so it's good to set the boundaries from beginning. Now,
Right.
Eric, one part which I'm sure you have this ambition to train fellow leaders, right? So to have the same mentality, and we need more people like yourself, or honestly, Eric, like because we sometimes we hear horrible stories from the field. So how do you spot someone that's, in your opinion, in engineering team, to be coachable to become a leader? What some of the traits you look for?
I look for, this is tough, right? I know what I look for. So I look for folks who step up, who are happy to pair up with other developers to help them solve problems. They often volunteer, hey, I see you're having that problem. Do you want to pair up? And then they'll pair up very quickly. Um, I I listen to the way they talk to other people. So, do they have more of an empathetic approach, or, are they kind of mean to people when they're kind of providing them suggestions, if you will? I look at, the things that they put in their PR reviews. Are they providing examples? Are they looking for areas of growth, for that code base as opposed to like nitpicking? Um, you know, um, I look for people who are even keeled and calm. I definitely can have kind of a high affect. I can get very energetic. Um, and so I look for folks who can go into a situation and maybe are a little bit, can be very calm and direct and kind of help folks take a step back and see what the problem is. All that stuff happens publicly. These are things that you don't necessarily pick up in a one-on-one. And I think, again, as an engineering leader, if you're paying attention, you're going to see that. And then the last little thing, I will check with folks, if to see if they are interested in kind of getting into more of a leadership role beyond being a lead developer. Um, Not everyone wants to do that. If someone is happy at the level they're at and they don't want to advance anymore, I think that's great. I help them get better at that level. I don't force people to get promoted or become leaders. Doing that ends up with really bad leaders. You end up with folks who are not happy in that role, and they may self-sabotage, and you don't want to set the folks up for failure that way.
Yeah, I heard a lot of stories about people who didn't want, but they were forced to, and they confessed. I was a bad manager. They told me this. Like I wasn't a good leader.
Mhm.
So, but for the folks who are really interested, any resources, any books, maybe Eric, you advise them to go and check out?
Oh gosh, I don't read a lot of books on leadership, for good or ill. I have found the best way uh, for me to have learned. So I would say the approach that I took was to find mentors.
Mm-hmm.
Every step of along the way in my career, I have found someone who I have learned something important from them. And you can tell who's going to be a good mentor. Are they empathetic? Do they talk to you? Is their door open? Do they give you advice when you ask for it? Do they listen when you don't want advice? Um, and that mentor, you know, may leave where you're at. And I think it's important for you as you grow, keep in touch with that mentor. You know, meet with them for lunch on a regular basis. Talk about where you're at. It doesn't have to be a formal mentoring relationship. It can be very informal, but I have found the people that I learned from, and that I'm still learning from, over the course of 20 years. Um, I can meet up with them over lunch. I could talk to them about a situation I have going on. They'll give me some advice. It's always sound, and that helps me grow. And I think that's the most important thing you can do. I know there are a lot of books out there. I wish I could recommend some, but I'm a big fan of talking to other leaders that you respect, and keeping them in your life and continuing to learn from them for the rest of your life.
Make completely sense. It doesn't have necessarily always to be a book. Like mentors are resources, by the way. It's like you can learn from an open book. I would call it like live, and as you watch them, you listen to what they say. Um, I can say myself. Majority of the things I learned was from people that I used to consider as my idols, and followed them and listened to what they say and how they do things, and thinking like how, if they are not available, the one hack that works for me is to pause for a second and say, hey, like, if, let's say, if Eric was with me now, what he would say. Like, I would just imagine that you're with me, and what you would advise me to do. And this is just like a couple of seconds or maybe 1 minute pause. It gives this clarity, usually on what you should do next. um Eric, like, if I want you to leave the audience with kind of final word of wisdom or anything that you would like to share, so what you would tell, and of course, a traditional question where people can know more about you and get in touch.
So from a word of wisdom, I'm building off of something you said. I remember one of my mentors said something to me I think is really, really important, which is trust yourself. You know, you got to where you are today for a reason. You're smart, you're competent, you know what you're doing. People have trusted you to put you in the role you are today, as a lead developer, an engineering manager, director of technology, CTO, whatever. And building on what you said, Mehmet, I think taking um, taking that moment and trusting your inner voice and moving forward is often the best thing you can do. Don't get caught up worrying about an issue, you know, going back and forth, causing yourself stress, staying up until 3 o'clock in the morning trying to solve it. I've often found, meditating for a few minutes, taking the deep breath, making the decision, owning it, and moving on. Trust your inner voice. 99% of the time, it's right. And then as far as the best way to find me, look for me on LinkedIn. My profile is relatively up to date. I could definitely be reached there. And then I do have some social medias, but those are for non-work purposes. So definitely
No
find
problem.
me on LinkedIn.
No problem at all. Eric, really, I enjoyed the conversation. Like, your knowledge and your experience speaks about itself, indeed. Uh, I learned a lot from you, and I'm a little bit biased because one of the main reasons which pushed me to start this podcast is to get inspiring leaders like yourself to share from their experience, to because now imagine someone listened to this, he's listening to you, or she is listening to you, and you are kind of indirectly a mentor. So this is why really I appreciate all what you shared with us today, all the insights also. And of course, I know how busy it can be. So you took this time to dedicate it to me today. So thank you again. And this is for the audience. This is how I usually end my podcast episodes. So if you just discovered this podcast by luck, thank you for passing by. And I hope you enjoyed. If you did so, give me a favor, subscribe, share it with your friends and colleagues. We're available on all the platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube videos, of course. And if you are one of the people who keep coming again and again, thank you very much for your loyalty. I can't thank enough all my audience and, of course, all my guests, including you, Eric, because this year is special. The podcast is doing very well. We're getting in the top 200 Apple Podcast charts across multiple countries for the first time since I started 2.5 years ago. So this is big for me. Maybe it's a small thing, but for me, this is big because that means people are listening and getting benefit out of it, which makes me happy. This is the main cause of the podcast. So thank you very much. And as I promised you every time, we will be in a new episode very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hit that subscribe button, share the show with your tech-savvy friends and fellow entrepreneurs, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Your support means the world to us.